we've been working for exactly 1 day. And it's crazy. So I'm super happy to be here this week. I will be, well, 2 weeks, but this week in particular, I will be introducing 3 visual arts lectures this week. And this is the first of those 3, so you'll get tired of me by the 3rd one, but I'll try to keep it interesting. One of the things that I like to talk about when I talk about Christion and his wife Jessica Wimbley, who's here tonight as well, and will be speaking on Thursday, is that because they hail from the Claremont area, which is part of the Los Angeles megaplex, they kind of come from an art world that really embraces artists and creatives that wear multiple hats, especially in the visual arts world. Critic, curator, visual artist. You can move through these various areas and it's embraced. And it results in artists that have this incredible creative breadth and practice. And it's really, really true with these two. And so I wrote this class largely based on their work. So I want to tell you a little bit about Chris before he comes out. I have some notes because everybody has so many wonderful accomplishments. So Christion received his MFA from the University of California, Irvine, and his BFA from the University of Oklahoma. Christion has exhibited throughout the United States and Europe, including the Orange County Center for Contemporary Art, the Wagnall Museum of Contemporary Art, and the University of Dortmund in Germany. His work was featured in the acclaimed 2005 feature film, Me, You, and Everyone We Know, as well as in a number of publications, including Immaculate, Contemporary Images of Jesus and the Virgin Mary. Chris has also taught studio and practicum courses in the art departments of the University of California, Irvine, and Claremont Graduate University. In 2012, he was named a fellow in 2 prestigious programs, the AAMG Academic Museum and Gallery Leadership Seminar in partnership with the Kellogg School of Management. In addition to his art, he has worked for several years as an assistant coordinator of an education and outreach program provided by the UC Irvine Libraries. The program focused on information literacy and visual literacy instruction for teachers and students in high-risk school districts. So Chris and Jessica are both artist curators. As a curatorial team, Wimbley and Christion developed a series of curatorial projects contextualizing the visual arts within biomythography, which is what we'll be talking about a lot in our course this week. So to define that for you, and they'll both be talking about this in their talks, biomythography is a literary term. It is a style of composition that weaves myth, history, and biography in an epic narrative. Defined by Audre Lorde in her seminal piece, Dami, A New Spelling of My Name, it has been known to shape theories of intersectionality and highlight the idea of internal, external, and multiple selves. As artist curators, Christion and Wimbley are intrigued by the interconnected and multifaceted link of biomythography across disciplines, particularly the visual arts. So they curate these shows, and they are on the 3rd iteration of this show that's opening August 30th at the Claremont Graduate University in the Los Angeles area. So if you're in Southern California, join us at the opening on the 30th of August. And they are working with artists in partnership from Los Angeles and Costa Rica. So it'll be really, really fantastic. So if you're still around, please join us. And please join me in welcoming Christion.
Good evening. So I'm Christion. This will be my artist talk. I'm going to start out with a little bit about my practice, and then as this is about autobiography, I'm going to go into a little bit of my personal history and then fold that into my art practice. Yes, so you can see. Okay, so my practice is an exploration of the impact that a lack of diversity in authorship and information in science, visual representation, and mediated communication has had and continues to have on our collective consciousness, in particular in understandings of race and gender, performance of masculinity, and the revolving and often destructive cycles of objectification, exploitation, and then the often social political exclusion that come with all that stuff. Now, as I go through this, hopefully that'll break down a little easier. So to start, I was born in Harbor City, California, raised in Compton till I was about 5. When I was 5, my dad, who was trained as an engineer, felt that he wouldn't live long, and so he wanted to do something meaningful with his life. So 10 years into marriage, my family moved us to Ohio so that my father could attend Trinity Lutheran Seminary and become a Lutheran minister. And we moved to Ohio in the 80s. I was born in 75, so 5 years into this, we moved to Ohio, and to give some background for the Lutheran Church, it was first in 1877 when they started making any kind of outreach to the black community. And then following World War II, and a lot of people leaving, a lot of blacks leaving the South, and with that, the Lutheran Church. The next kind of attempt for outreach wasn't done until 1977. So, I was born in 75, and 5 years later, this is when my dad chose to go to seminary. Two of my dad's main influence were Martin Luther King Jr. and Dr. Nelson Wesley Trout. Dr. Trout was also the first African-American bishop to become the bishop of the ELCA, was the Lutheran Church. And he was also the very influential in facilitating my dad's first church, which was in LA, because he knew my dad wanted to go back to LA. Fortunately, during that time, the kind of blacks entering pastorships at churches, even black congregations, was fairly new, and they weren't quite ready for what they got. This is Vernon Johns. He was one of my, also one of my father's idols. He was a social reformer, farmer, preacher, and civil rights pioneer. And he was also the predecessor to Dr. Martin Luther King when he, before he came to Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. My dad always liked this movie that, where James Earl Jones plays Vernon Johns. And he liked this movie because he always thought it was kind of a good representation of our family life. Partly because Johns was known to scold black congregations for being consumers and embarrassed and unwilling to do manual labor, and accused them of kind of standing still and doing nothing while their racists being killed. As a result, he was repeatedly fired from several prestigious positions, and a lot of what's known about him is very limited to text because he wasn't necessarily documented greatly. My parents also believed in sort of a progressive social black conscious or gospel tradition, and in my understanding, it was a kind of combination between seminary teaching and black church traditions kind of being combined that had a lot of pastors seeing racial justice activism and social justice as core to the divine practice. Now, for a lot of blacks, the Lutheran Church was sort of a status symbol, and so not everybody was necessarily happy with bringing kind of back the old black traditions into Lutheran churches. And up to this point, the Lutheran Church was predominantly small within the black community. There weren't a lot of them, and the majority of them were pastored by white pastors. So we sort of fall into a lot of pushback from the black community. Partly, it was due to, I think, the kind of clash of social responsibility and black respectability. And, doing some research about the Lutheran Church, it was my understanding that nearly every pastor that participated in kind of the social gospel tradition received pushback from their congregations, including Martin Luther King Jr., whose denomination actually literally opposed him and the civil rights movement originally. So growing up in kind of this environment, for me, moving into different places. Part of the pushback, similar to Bernie John's, came with us moving a lot. My dad wasn't one to hold his tongue, so as a result, we moved a lot of places. So I've lived in Southern California, Northern California, Detroit, Ohio, and Oklahoma. And I became kind of very internal with my thoughts. Okay, so I don't know if anybody remembers this, but it's this is a show from the 90s called Dream On. And Dream On basically focused on the exploits of the main character, Martin Tupper, who was this basically man-child who was raised from infant to adulthood on watching TV. As a result, all of his kind of dreams and fantasies and inner thoughts get translated as these like little black and white clips. What I like about that is it totally kind of represent how I kind of grew up. I grew up watching TV, and to be honest, if it was like, you put a little drawing pad there, then that was pretty much me. And it also dealt with kind of how I dealt with information and taking in information. It was a lot about kind of putting all this life experience and information and all the kind of media information I was getting, kind of indexing it into my head, and then kind of compressing it all into my own kind of narrative. And that was my understanding of how I figure out things. And so a lot of what I was taking in was like looking for representations of people that looked like me. And so 90s was the rise of the UPN and the WB networks. And originally they were focused on young black viewership. Unfortunately, a lot of what they put across image-wise was a little too kind of reminiscent of negative stereotypes. And shows like Homeboys in Outer Space, remember that? We sit around two black astronauts who flew around the universe in a winged car named the Space Hoopty, and a talking female computer named Laquita. The Secret Diary of Minnie had Desmond Pfeiffer, which is my absolute favorite one. This was an American sitcom that featured an English nobleman named Desmond Pfeiffer. Actually, it was Pfeiffer, the P is silent. Who was kidnapped by his enemies and sent to America on a slave ship. He eventually becomes President Lincoln's valet, and comedy ensues. Yeah, that was on TV. And of course, Wayne Brothers, yeah. Remember that. Need I say more? So what resulted in this was, some blacks saw these as, examples of a rich black comedic tradition, and others saw it as cooning. And by the end, the Fox just decided to switch to a young male viewership, which you can read as young white male viewership, because that was more desirable to advertisers. And to speak about whiteness just a little bit, since my talk is called Interacting Whiteness, I wanted to talk about whiteness as I'm using it a lot in my work, which is looking at whiteness as what it is, which is a cultural construct. This artist, Margaret Bowman, who has the work up here, would describe it as many cultures. He talked about how multiple cultures used it. She says, many cultures whitened, ultimately believing that suffering the diminishment of individuality and identity, allowing yourself to become non-identifiable blank slate for projection, one has achieved a higher level of knowledge and actual awareness of being. So, in that sense, whiteness is a construct of normativity and natural behaviors and traits, rather than kind of biological category. And much like maleness in U.S. society is understood as both a natural and preferable condition of being. So when I was in undergrad, my dad passed away at 65. And so kind of trying to understand kind of my background, and I started reading some of his books. And one was James H. Cone. He had a lot of his books. And he had he was best known for his kind of Black liberation theology. And two things that stuck with me was kind of his definition of blackness, which is more along the lines of aligning with alignment with the oppressed. It says blackness has little to do with your skin color, but rather blackness is being black means that in your heart, your soul, your mind, and your body are where the dispossessed are. And I really liked kind of tying that together. And then along with, in terms of representation, I started thinking more about, kind of a variety of more complicated, I guess, representations of black males that I was seeing. So A Soldier Story was one of my favorite movies, from 1984. It's basically about a black captain who was sent to investigate an possible race-based murder in the South. And what I loved about this was the representation of the different characters. So you had Sergeant Vernon Waters, who was basically self-hating black who believed that if he could just bring his men to achieve this level of victory and prestigiousness, that he could somehow kind of overcome the viewpoint that they had of him and his people. Then there was C.J. Memphis, who was this private who was kind of that's a representation of kind of the black brute, just kind of high archetype of a large black muscular male who is athletic and sexually virile, but had this hold to this kind of old Southern, black tradition, self-learned kind of knowledge. There's Captain Davenport, who I relate to a lot because he was this captain that was stuck between he was a captain in a time period where there were no black captains, but then he was black, and so on this kind of landscape, he didn't quite meet any of the expectations of either group. And then there was Private Peterson, who was this character played by Denzel Washington brilliantly, who was basically an epitome of black rage. He had all the kind of tropes and kind of abilities to kind of do basically what Vernon Waters was trying to do, but he was so filled with anger over what had happened to him and his people that he couldn't quite let that go. So in thinking of this, I was thinking of dealing with kind of how I took at things across the boundaries between historical facts and life experience and pop culture and mythology and celebrating of difference, because one of the things that dawned on me was like, as though I related more closely to one of those characters, I related to all of them, and I kind of could understand all of them, and all of them in some ways existed inside of me. And so kind of ideas of biomythography and weaving together myth and history and epic narrative were very relatable to me. And they come from this woman, Audre Lorde, who was a Caribbean American writer, radical feminist, womanist, lesbian, and civil activist. And the thing that I most related to was the fact that she understood that all these labels could not be viewed independently of one another, but rather the intersection of these identities, which frequently reinforced each other, had to be considered holistically. So then I went back to Cone, and I started thinking about representation, how it was used, and how it functioned in multiple ways in terms of putting things right out there. So to go back to his ideas of the cross and the lynching tree, was basically that the Roman Catholic Church crucified people in order to reinforce their power. The same way that happened after the Civil War, as blacks were no longer slaves, the lynchings rose because it was the way to reinforce that blacks were not in power. And we see this continued through art. And so I'll use this as an example. This is a painting of the Battle of the Bunker. And this guy you see kind of cowering behind the captain here is believed to be Peter Salem, who's actually a former slave who fought on the side of the Americans in the Revolution and was largely credited for winning this battle. And the reason I use this is because the depiction of him actually clearly doesn't depict that. And in fact, it was considered in the 80s that it wasn't even Peter Salem, but rather it was the captain's slave who he was guarding as he also tried to fight the army. And I think one of the reasons that this is relevant because depicting American support by blacks and then enslaving them is not, is not the greatest narrative. And so this painting was done in the 70s, and so one historian actually said that the Civil War is an interesting case of history being written by the losers. So I think about other ways in which this kind of plays out in the media. So, so we know kind of the darkening of O.J. Simpson. And I combine this with ideas of looking at mugshots of white males who are in power, and I found those interesting because if you notice that you always see them smiling, and partly it's kind of a marketing or a campaigning trick, because if you crop out the number and it just looks like a press photo. Keep in mind that you never get arrested. And that brought me to thinking about Willie Lynch. And if nobody knows who Willie Lynch is, in the 80s, Willie Lynch was a convict who was convicted of murder and was serving a life sentence when he was released on a furlough program in Massachusetts. Why this is important is because it was during the time it was a campaign year, and Michael Dukakis, who was at the time the mayor of, or governor of Massachusetts, supported this furlough program. And because of that, George W. Bush and his campaign team used this as a way to prove that Dukakis was weak on crime. And in using this, they used this image of Willie Horton to basically scare people by every chance they get running this ad and connecting Dukakis to this scary, vicious black man who was released onto an innocent public. Similar case happened with Susan Smith, who in an amazing feat really just conjured up a black man out of nothing to blame for the crime of murdering her children. What I always thought was actually funny or interesting about this picture is it actually looks a lot like the image of the runaway slave. So these things go on through history. So all that being said, led to in graduate school these thoughts of how we kind of identify and locate these kind of markers of power or struggle or fear. And I came across this program called Faces that the police use to make mugshots. And what I liked about this, or I thought was interesting about this, is that it's based off this catalog that you see flashing. And you're supposed to be able to craft any person based off, this catalog. It is actually really limited in what you can do when it comes to people of color. I think there are like 4 hairstyles if you're black, and like 2 lips. So I found it fascinating that they were using these things to actually kind of identify, criminals. And so I started playing with them as kind of using them to identify people who were in the news all the time. And partly I did this by going and finding images from the internet. Because I like the internet because it was, you know, you're 3-4 times removed sometimes from the actual person. So you're trying to re-render something out of like this kind of digital haze. And then I would try to patch them back together using this catalog of features. Michael Jackson actually was really easy to do because he doesn't have any features. But moving into other characters, I was just putting, you know, people who were in the news at the time, you know, pretty randomly, and seeing if I could, you know, patch them together in ways that they were identifiable. And it's funny, a lot of them, some kind of were, some really weren't, but none of them really looked like, you know, the people I was trying to make because of the limitations. It's like, especially when you got the people of color, I started, you know, you're using kind of features that were made for like in the female section of the catalog to try to make something somewhat similar to what names. Pretty messed up program. And so I made these kind of huge wallpaper-like images of them because I wanted them to be somewhat epic. And I made all these little masks that people carried around in the galleries with them. And I wanted them to kind of be these kind of iconic sticker things. So that was kind of my first attempt at moving into this area of representation. After which I found this book and this show called Portraits of People that explored kind of the way in which portraiture used Black people, which was pretty much as objects to kind of service the center white character and add to the status. And so, in thinking of all this, I started doing a series of portraits called Portraits of Criminals in 2006. And the idea was that I wanted to kind of make this step reading, I guess, of them. So when you kind of came across them at first, I drew them all out fully, and then I would erase the placard that they were holding that identified them as criminals. So when you originally saw them, it was just kind of this portrait with this ghosted image that as you approached it, you realized, okay, these people are criminals. And then as you read the title, and I did the titles in the same way that they're actually entered in the criminal log. I found all these mugshots actually off of the internet, and as they were entered was kind of like Gregory Get Colored Male. So I redid that on the labels. And the idea was, as you approach it, you kind of try to identify these people who are again drawn from internet images. So it's sort of like them, but not. And as you come close, you start thinking a little bit of realization. And then as you read the tag, you get the name. And then you also get that they're a criminal, kind of all in these kind of steps. Then I did this series in relation to this just really recently. It's 2014 called Fractures. That I was kind of interested in a similar way relating the way in which we treat and care for and value people when they're objects. And then the violence that happens to people when we objectify them. And they were all from kind of civil rights leaders. And I showed them put it together. I wanted to show them kind of almost like they were, you know, just stuck up on a post office. Now this is an image from recently. I went to Costa Rica recently, and I was at the Jade Museum, and I came across this, and I had to photograph it because it was the strangest thing I'd seen. It was, a picture where the label reads, person wearing body adornments made of jade, ear spools, nose rings, necklaces, waistband, pendants, as well as tattoos. And what I thought was odd is then they did this silhouette where they just removed them and left just the jewelry. And I thought that was really bizarre. working on, that's why I included, which I was kind of, one, dealing with a myth. It was the myth of, that I had heard over and over as a child, you know, whether it's true or not, that the people came, the explorers came, and when they discovered the Greek statues, and that there's a connection that the Moors at some point conquered, and some of the Greek statues were actually a black man, and so all the penises were removed off Greek statues to kind of hide the fact that they were that these statues were actually black men. And I always thought that was hilarious. And so I wanted to play with that kind of idea, so I started doing these drawings of the missing penises. And so I was like doing these, and I was putting up, I had to put up all these porn drawings of black penises, which are strangely enough really hard to find. I was out enough searching for them, but then I realized that to kind of find these like pics, I had to use the most vulgar language possible. And which, again, I found interesting. So part of it I thought was, it's such a removal. And even in the pictures, it's like, they're not that different from this. It's like, you don't get the full body. It's just like a penis and like a leg. So they're so far removed that I sort of wanted to, even as penises, sort of try to give them their humanity back. And so I wanted to render them as lovingly as possible. And then I also then matched them with these statues that had lost their penises. And I did my best to kind of match the way they rested. So it looked like they were knocked off. And I would show those kind of in connection, not directly with them. And I would say the pink actually was a happy accident. I don't even know how I did that, but I did it and I thought it looked awesome. So it was fitting, so I stuck with it. So then after kind of thinking about portraiture, I started looking at still life painting. And partly because I got into both of these because I hated still life and I hated portraiture kind of coming up in art. And a lot of it was because I realized that I never saw myself in them. And then, you know, one day I realized that the reason I didn't see myself in them is because we were in it as kind of this invisible labor force. So I was looking at this book, and it talked a lot about the trade items that were used in still life paintings. So a lot of these things were representations of status because they were so hard to get as trade items. And partly they were so hard to get because the slave labor around them was either really harsh or really kind of hard to acquire. And so, connecting with that, I started doing a series of still lifes. And I kind of wanted to mimic this 19th century kind of style, but kind of add in what was missing. So I started taking recipes that came from 19th century slave plantation kind of, you know, soul food and all that, which came from basically the scraps that slaves received from their masters. And I started incorporating them kind of back onto the master's table in a sense. So this picture is still life of melons and a pig foot. This one is salmon and ham hock. And I really wanted to kind of try to make them look as realistic as possible. So this is still life with lobster and sweet potato pie. And this is still life with game and fried chicken. And then we've done a show that featured both the portraits and my friend had done these sculptures in which she was doing these body kind of molds of herself. And so there were these deep kind of empty body shells in these kind of removed people. Now I kind of went back to Vernon Johns, and I was thinking about one of the first things that Vernon Johns did when he started at the church was to change the church sign to make it larger. And he would really had some kind of really hardcore And so he would blow these up on the outside, so that in a way that the church sign served as an old school Twitter feed. To kind of look good. And I wanted to do something kind of honoring that, but also kind of holding this history and his sermons together because there wasn't much documentation of it. So I went through between the movie and searching for his sermons and pulled the titles of his sermons together and made these kind of miniature signage as a way to kind of preserve that legacy. And a lot of my work started to, it does touch a lot of times onto religious iconography because I grew up with that. So this is a confessional. And I was really into the shape of this, and I liked also the idea, especially in relation to the gallery, of contrition and submission that happens with a kneeler. And so this is a piece called Right Chastisement, Punish the Body to Correct the Soul. It's from 2014. And the purpose is basically you're to kind of kneel in front, or kneel on this kneeler and watch a video. And the video is of a clip of Jackson Pollock or from the movie, of him developing his strip painting, which I always thought was like, this kind of really masturbatory idea of him like flinging his paint onto this pure white canvas. So in the video, I tried to kind of reenact this as kind of almost like a little meme that repeats, and to sort of kind of protect the innocence of the canvas, I put a little red blocker over the canvas. So it's just you and the witness to kind of Pollock flinging his paint. And then I got started, and similar to the last one, I got into the idea of kind of history and how it gets held. And I came across the story of Booker Wright. Booker Wright was he did an interview in 1965 where he spoke openly about racism and his treatment as a waiter in an all-white restaurant in Mississippi. As a result, he got fired, and he also owned a business in the black part of town, and that was burnt down. So I made this piece because I had this found object that I found, and I liked it because it looked like sort of like a tree in the print. And I put this double-sided mirror in it, and I came across looking for this activist, was this deaf activist who was recounting the story of Booker Wright. And I love the idea that, you have this person who couldn't speak, giving back voice to this person who was basically destroyed because he did speak. And this is called Secret Life of Trees. This piece is called Specimen, and it's dealing with the idea of display and, again, dealing within the gallery and being on display as kind of this object. So basically it's this pedestal, and it's a double-sided mirror where randomly this image comes on of this roach who's stuck in a pin and slowly dying. And as you view this, there's audio of James Baldwin describing his relationship to the word nigger. And there's an image of the roach. This piece is called Your Pigmentation Ain't Shit. And it was referencing the ideas of minimalism and this kind of attempt to remove content and the privilege that it would be to be able to think that you can remove content from the viewing of work, because I feel like as a person of color, that really doesn't happen. It comes with it, and people apply their ideas of what I'm making of who I am prior to even getting into the gallery. So I wanted to kind of attempt those. So I attempted to make this really minimalist painting that was really ugly out of shoe polish and wax. Doing kind of the best I could. And I then loaded it with this audio. So as you come up to view it, you're looking at this artist.
Computation ain't shit, so nothing is.
Starts yelling at you. And it was more broken up than that. It's like in between these 5 or 2 3 minute breaks in between the audio, but for this purpose I put it all together. And so at times intervals, this painting blurs out a composition of audio snippets that came from a viral video of a woman who was angered over a perceived dismissal by a stranger because of her race. And I like the idea that in this painting, you don't quite know if the painting is yelling at you, if it's yelling at the other artworks in the gallery, or it's just yelling at everyone in general. It's just a pissed off painting. I started really getting into the idea of video because I was sort of working in it in these, like I said, kind of gift-like ways. But the way I was taking in kind of audio and video really was kind of really layered. And I like the idea of all this kind of audio and media happening at the same time, because that's a lot of times how we're taking in information. We don't take it all in these kind of quiet little settings. It's kind of all around you and media overload all the time. And so this is a show where I kind of included all these. So as you're viewing the video, you have another video running, you have James Baldwin randomly talking about his relationship to nigger, and then you have this painting randomly screaming at you. And I want to, of course, end of my slides, I want to end this on one of the videos, and this is the video that's in this installation, and it's from 2015, and it's titled Spirits of Saturn.
I have known rivers. I've known rivers ancient as the world, and older than the flow of human blood and human veins. My soul has grown deep like the rivers. I bathed in the Euphrates when lambs were young. I built my hut near the Congo and lulled me to sleep. I looked upon the Nile and raised the pyramids above it. I heard the singing of the Mississippi from Abraham down to New Orleans, and I've seen its muddy bosom turn all golden in the sunset. I have known rivers, ancient, dusky rivers. My soul has grown deep.
Keeping themselves white, to keep themselves projectable, in other words, non-identifiable, was everything. The dwarf and Velasquez are the locations of intelligence, the message of the painting. That suffering, diminishment, creates intelligence and creates actual awareness of being on this earth. And this idea of whitening, though, is in every single culture. One of the reasons they do it with the Japanese culture, the freaking geisha girl thing. Every single culture, even cultures that knew nothing about each other, and the African culture as well, whitened. And the reason they did it was to create a ghost or spirituality, to basically erase consciousness. Like when we go into a cosmetic counter at Bloomingdale's, and we look at those girls and think, man, they're probably good looking behind all that. You know, or there's something home there. But that sense of mass, that sense, again, back to the wedding, I will love you if you disappear and allow whatever I need to love to appear on you. So that's what the whitening is about. It has been throughout time. Good heavens, Queen Elizabeth whitened herself. I mean, Marie Antoinette almost died of lead poisoning from heavy white paint that she applied. There's white, I mean, you know, these are very white people, but you couldn't get white enough. It was to be a goddess. It was to erase your humanity.
Era promotes that with vinegar to create the Phoenician ceruse, or spirits of Saturn. A woman's complexion was highly sought after as it was considered the height of beauty. They employed egg whites to add show. Even as recently as the 1900s, Japanese and Chinese infants regularly died from ingesting cosmetic lead worn by their mothers. When this absorbs through the skin, poisoning may cause hair loss, weight loss, pain, brain damage, organ damage, paralysis, and a variety of other symptoms. When used in foundation, that causes skin to reveal and scar. Historically, the problem was remedied by applying more poisonous foundation to cover the damage.
I think it was when the Trayvon Martin incident happened, when he was shot, because we thought our boys could have been in the very same circumstance. That could easily be our own son. So that's when we realized we had to have a conversation. We are black and black, but we have to address it in certain ways by making sure that we're wearing clothes that are not ones that suggest that we are part of a criminal element, as people would say. It's no hoodies, it's no dark clothes. My boys know that they've got to be khaki pants. We don't do sweatshirts with words and names on them. This is really casual for them. They don't do the t-shirt thing. And when it comes to jackets, raincoats, this is the only time you're going to see a hood in our house is on a raincoat or a winter jacket. It's no colored high tops. It's loafers, it's white tennis sneakers. It's not carrying anything in your hand after sundown that could be misconstrued as a weapon. It's also making sure that when they go to stores, they get receipts. They walk in, they make eye contact and nod and smile to the shop owner. They make sure that their bags are zipped and left in the car or outside the store. It's also making sure that they never run in the presence of a police officer unless it's very apparent that they're dressed for jogging. They don't go out after sundown. My younger son said, "You're taking the fun out of being a black kid," but it just knows it's necessary. And once again, it's not because we're trying to make them white, it's just the whole issue of we don't want them to be profiled. My children are surrounded by black role models. We wanted our children to know this is what black people can become, and we are holding them at the same high standard. But my biggest fear for my black boys is I don't want them shot, I don't want them tasered. It's as simple as that. It's no longer even an issue of I want them to be treated with the same respect and dignity of other kids that are not black, that are their age. It's just, I want to keep them alive.
The worst thing about a gunshot, provided that you survive the bullet, is something called sepsis.
Infection of the blood.
So I'd say a bullet tears through your gut, creates a cavity, dead tissue. That cavity fills up with bile, bacteria. My daddy told me we got to turn our backs on this kind of those are ranks of the chitlins, the collard greens, the cornbread style. We're men. We can't let nobody go on living in your fools like you. Waited a long time for you, boy. But I got you. I put 2 inches of gel in Campbell, Kentucky, 3 and 4 black sugar. Now I've got you. One less fool for the rest to be ashamed of.
So that's what the whitening is about. It has been throughout time. We couldn't get white enough. It was to be a goddess. It was to erase your humanity.
Leslie?
there a particular event or even social, you talked a lot about media influencing it. Was there a particular artist or event or anything that drove you to influence your current work in the last few years?
God, countless of them.
Right.
I think, can everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I think God. I think the biggest influence actually has been more, not current media as much as going back and researching how much I actually looked at. And even to write this kind of artist talk, I did since it was largely about autobiography, kind of what I did was kind of, I go off recall, and then I'd go ask my mom, and to get a recall of what she got from this time period. And then I go research what happened in history. And then through all that, I kind of patched it together. So in a sense, I think it's more been kind of looking at all media and for myself kind of researching what exactly I took in during all that time.
Oh, here, we'll bring the mic to you.
I know you have many pieces, but was there one that is your favorite in a sense that just really hits home?
I don't know if I have a favorite, but I think for myself and where I am, I'm kind of partial to video right now, so I did the video.
All the images in the video, were they all found, or did you create them?
They're all fine. All stolen and appropriated images.
When creating a video, how do you know when it's done, or do you keep working on it until you feel it's right?
That's a good question. I kind of work on my videos in 3 parts. Kind of always, and I started out this way kind of because I don't really like video. We're in kind of like the viewing time. And so again, kind of like still life, I always try to find things that I'm not, I shouldn't say like, I'm not necessarily drawn to them. And so kind of ways I resolve that is to go figure out what it is that I'm not. And so as I've been doing this, I should say I've got a much better appreciation of video. So video artists out there don't get it. But I started kind of working in them as like these small segments. And I like that because, again, for me, kind of the viewing time, because I'm taking in so much, I'm dealing with kind of my own short attention span. So I try to make segments that like maybe 1-2 minute segments, and I'm like, that's awesome. And then I'll make the next one, and then I'll make the third one, and usually I'm like, they all have to go together. So I keep making them all as these separate things, but then they all have to go together because they don't kind of work separate. Yes?
Your work is extremely impactful. I want to let you know that. And I did have a question. What do you feel? Do you feel like you are reaching your audience? And if so, what do you hope inspires them most about it?
As a reaching audience, I would consider you guys my audience. So you're seeing it. And I guess I would say what I hope you get from it is that, in a way, I'm not necessarily, I never see my work as trying to make a statement. I don't see myself necessarily as kind of a political artist. More kind of, I understand myself to have, I guess, a social responsibility. But for me, it's more about the dialogue. So I guess I'm always trying to complicate that. And I like the idea, and that's I think why I'm partial to videos. I think when you start doing work with content as a person of color, people are always, in a way, trying to, it can easily get dismissed as something people already understand, because race is always such a hard thing to talk about that people want to go, got it, and then move on. And so my thought is like, almost present it in a way in which you can do that, but if you actually listen to it, it doesn't all actually go together. It's all these random thoughts that are kind of disconnected, and sometimes they're not even, they're opposing each other. And that's a lot of how we deal with these information, but it is, again, kind of with, ideas of biolithography, intersectionality. The idea is not necessarily to make a hierarchy of these ideas, but actually to kind of lay them out and deal with them all on the same plane so that you actually then start a dialogue. Because once you start removing people's voices from it, you're not really having a dialogue. Yes?
Did you and your father talk
Did you and your father talk much about your work? Because I would consider your work to be making an impact that maybe his made to his audience. And I find your work to be so important, and I'm just so curious if he talked to you about what he thought about your work, and if he considered the way you chose to use your voice as just as loud as his, or just what that, the differences and similarities.
Unfortunately, not much. My dad passed away when I was an undergrad, right after my thesis show. So he really didn't get to see kind of where the work developed, but I don't know, I always feel like sort of in conversation with him, because like I said, I pulled a lot from what he looked at, and kind of combined it with what I'm also doing. But it's interesting because it's, I've been talking with my mother a lot about this, and she is also keeping me in on that. It was them that did it, and not just my dad. So I think in a way I feel as if it's kind of carrying on the same kind of tradition of what he would have done, different format. So I think, I feel like he's out there. But I actually, in terms of how I related to things, was closer with my mother, and in the sense closer with my mother's thinking. So a lot of this has been a kind of exploration of realization that I'm actually a lot closer to my father's way of thinking than I thought too, and that's because they did it together. Yes?
Yes, I was wondering, what has your journey been like in terms of telling your truth and in terms of telling your truth and these issues about blackness, anti-blackness, white fragility, while still having to deal with that within the art industry and being in these white spaces, putting up your work. I was wondering how that journey is, because I'm starting to see, or maybe there might be a crack in which I can do it in theater. So I'm really interested in your journey.
Difficult, but to be expected. But I would say, I think, I'll say that for me, when I started, it was, in a way, I think I had the benefit of not being in a place where there was an expectation of things happening, I guess. I went to undergrad at University of Oklahoma. Most of my teachers, to begin with, were these awesome Native American artists that had no real connection or interest in the commercial art world. And so I for the longest time, actually, until moving to California, I never even thought that artists made money off art. The whole idea of selling was like all new to me. I just assumed nobody's gonna buy the black penises. Might show, but I don't know. Somebody's gonna have a wall of black dicks. But I could be wrong. But and because of that, I think I've always thought of myself and thought of my career path more as wanting to be an arts professional rather than just a maker of things. I wanted to be able to have a place in which I had a voice, and part of me having that voice was an understanding that I needed to be able to do the things that the people do to get a voice. And I didn't necessarily have the resources to those, so I had to figure out how to do it myself. So it's like I figured out kind of how to install my own work. I figured out how work is laid out, how you market, make cards and all that things. So that ultimately I figured, well, I can do all this for myself. And so when it comes around to needing somebody to do it for me, and I can also help dictate how it's done. In terms of the landscape I find now, I think I look at making work a little differently now because of the internet, largely. Because it's like you have all this access that wasn't there before. I mean, when I was at school, to even look at work of people of color, somebody had to bring you something. You didn't have, you couldn't just jump on the internet when I was an undergrad. It was, even when we had the internet, it wasn't all on there yet. So, now it's like, if you don't understand something, you Google it and you got it in 5 minutes. So I don't necessarily worry as much about people getting it, because you have the ability to. And it's like, I can only do so much. But I'll put it out there. I have a website where I explain a lot of it. And then, you can also research some of these ideas. So for me, I feel like, in that sense, my work is done. And it's just to simply put the work out there, put my ideas out there. Because removed from where we were, you now have the access to do the background information and get that stuff if you really want to. What about you?
It's all right, okay. You were speaking about the internet right now, and sometimes I find, because I'm a filmmaker myself, sometimes I find that the speed at which things come out, or ideas come out for artists is a little too quick for me at times. And I don't know how you personally as an artist deal with that, whether taking your processing, your time to make something the way you want to make it, versus battling that speed that the internet has now given artists. Whether you find somebody, you land on an idea and then next week somebody already did it and you're like, damn! Or, I don't know how you personally deal with that, or how, if you could give me any advice in terms of efficiency when it comes to creating work.
A good question too. I actually was having a similar conversation with my wife last night, where we were talking about, there was I think it was Jay-Z did a response to kind of the violence that's happening. It was this really quick response, and I listened to the song and I was like, I don't like this. This is awful. My opinion. But and part of it was we thought it was rushed. You could tell it was like a snap response, and because of that, I thought it was missing something. And so I tend to make work really fast. I'm always making stuff, but for me, I don't show it as fast, and that's just not on me. I don't always get asked to show it either. So, but I think I've come to like that though. I like to sit with stuff a little bit, and particularly it's like like all of us, you can make work, but it's not that you necessarily get to live with it. It's like I have my full-time job plus doing the art, so it's like I run in and out on my work. And so I get to see it, maybe on the weekends. So I need to like be able to spend a little more time with it to see what it's doing. But I also tend to believe it's like we move with the speed of light, but we're not processing that fast. We're just getting the information that fast. It's like there are ideas that come out of, and we see it because you get repeated ideas on the internet. It's like I've seen things pop up that went viral that I saw like 10 years ago. It's just that people got it now, and something else happened. And all of a sudden now it's like, oh my God, did you see this? I'm like, yeah, 10 years ago. So I don't think it necessarily changes things. I don't think necessarily people take we're not able to process as fast as we're never going to be able to process as fast as we're going to get the information, or as information can come. At least that's what I believe.
Thank you.
I'm free to answer any questions anybody has to afterwards.